Hey, this is Andrew Brown, and welcome to this training video. And the purpose of this video is to give you the essential skills that you need to know in order to be a web application developer. This is something that I would expect like a junior developer to know right off the bat so they can be productive on day one. And this is all about setting up API endpoints that are backed by raw SQL queries in a Ruby on Rails application. What we're going to need are a few things to get started with. You're going to have Ruby installed, but you're going to have a very specific version. I want you to have the latest version, which should be Ruby 2.71. There could be a newer version, but it's just whatever the stable release is. So I have it installed here via RVM, which is Ruby Version Manager. So I'm going to just switch over to that version there. You're also going to need to have Rails installed, and you'll also have to have bundler installed. So it's just gem install Rails. Those are two gems we're going to need. And a few other tools we're going to be using today. We're going to be using Postman over here. So Postman is a service that is used to test API endpoints. Then we're going to have Table Plus, and this is used for viewing database data. We could totally do this in the console, but it's a lot easier if we use these tools here. Just to show you, I have them off to the side here. So that's Table Plus, and there is Postman. And when you do install Postman, it is free, but they really like you to make an account. You absolutely don't have to. You just have to look for the link at the bottom below that's gray that says skip the sign up process there. And so now I'm back to my developer environment here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new Rails application on my desktop. So we're going to type in Rails new. I'm going to name this my app. And that's going to create a new folder with a bunch of default files. And it's also going to install a bunch of gems I'm going to need. Now, this process was very fast for me, and that's because I've already installed these gems previously. But I just want you to know that if you experience slowdowns or long waits at Nokugiri, at FFI, for SAS CSS, that is totally normal. They need to build native extensions, and this could take your build time up to 15-20 minutes. It just depends on the speed of your computer. But as you can see, since I've done this before, it's super fast for me. And now that I've created that new application, I'm just going to list out the directories and then cd into that directory. And now I'm going to just open up in my code editor that folder. So it's on the desktop here. So I'm just going to switch over to my desktop. And we're going to open my app. Great, and I'm just going to open up I guess it already opened a terminal window for me there. I'm just going to do an ls, and so there is the basis or the skeleton of my application. Now, I'm going to need a few more things to get started here. I want you to make your way over to the gem file. This specifies all the gems or Ruby libraries that are being used. We do not need Webpacker today. You can see that we have the Ruby version up here that's specified. So all these versions are going to be compiled against that version of Ruby. We're going to need Figaro. So Figaro is a configuration management tool. It's a way of passing sensitive variables to your application, so you don't have to embed them into your code. Absolute standard that you should be adopting. We're not going to be using SQLite today. We're going to be using Postgres, which is a real database. And make sure you do have Postgres installed on your machine. I'm using Postgres 11, which is the latest version. So whatever is the latest, that's what you should be using. And I'm just going to pull up Figaro here just to show you. So Figaro is a gem. You can find it on GitHub, and it's going to ask us to install, create an application YAML file and specify our environment variables, which are going to be accessible this way. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead to our config directory, create a new file here. I'm going to call this application.yaml. And we're going to have to specify some sensitive data. And the thing that we need to specify here is actually our information to connect to our database. And so I'm just going to copy something off screen here from one of my example application YAML files. And what we've defined here is a database connection URL. And so I can't remember if MySQL supports this, but Postgres, if you have this defined, it will just be picked up by the PG gem, and you don't have to define all the things in here. So normally what you'd do is you'd say database and username and etc. But when we have the connection URL, it just passes all that information all in one go. This is set up for SQLite, so I'm going to go off screen, and I'm just going to go ahead and grab the Postgres configuration. Okay. And I've been doing this for years, so this is just what I know to do. So just whatever you see here, that's what you're going to want to write in. And I just want to talk about this. So here we have Postgres as the protocol. Generally, Postgres databases have a default user of Postgres. You might have to create your own. If you have a database that needs a password, you do user and then put your password in here. But we don't need to do that. Localhost means the computer that we're running on. And then we're just going to name our database here on the end. So I'm going to call it my app dev, my app test. And the reason we're creating both the development and test, I feel that if we don't have a test, it might throw an error because in our gem file, it does come with some test libraries installed. And so just to avoid those issues, we're going to have that. But anyway, now that we have that configured application YAML or database YAML, what I want you to do is go ahead and run bundle install, because even though we added these 2 lines here, those gems are not necessarily installed. And we'll go ahead and install that. And I mean, it should show updates here. And if you're ever wondering, like, if things have been added, there's this gem lock file. It shows the exact locked versions that are in here. So if we search for Figaro PG, we could see them there. I'm not too worried about that right now. I'm just going to type in clear. And so now that we have our database and stuff like that, let's go ahead and create our initial database. So I'm going to type in rake db create, and that's going to create us a database. Now this threw an error here. This is just a bug with my local development. You may or may not have this error, but it's trying to run the task twice, because up here it says create a database. So the database has definitely been created, and I can even confirm that. I can go to Postgres, just type in -u Postgres here. And if I just do -l for tables, I can see my table is there. So my table definitely exists, so I'm just going to ignore that problem. But as you can see, even I run into problems on a day-to-day basis, and you'll absolutely run into problems. But one of the things about being a developer is you have to work through those problems. Okay, there's no easy path. So that database definitely exists. I want to just create a default page to run this application. Rails has a welcome page, so if we run this, we'll be able to see it. So I'm going to run Rails server or serve. We can just put S, which is server or serve for short. For my environment, I do have to specify bind. You probably don't have to do this. It just depends if you're running your development environment in a virtual machine. So I'm going to have to bind to 000. You definitely don't have to do this. We could specify the port, so we could say 8080, whatever we want. I'm going to leave it as the default, which is 3000. I'm just used to that. And we're going to go ahead and start this app up. And you can see that it's listing on port 3000 here. And so I'm just going to copy my address here. Again, if you are using virtual machine, you're going to have to map all these IPs. If you're using just Rails installed on your Mac machine, then it's going to be localhost. So I'll just go here and I'm just going to put in 3000 here. And you can see I have the default page. Now I don't want the default page, so let's go ahead and make our own. So in order to do that, we'll have to make our way over to the routes. And you'll notice that I'm not using any of the generators. Rails has a lot of built-in generators. A lot of tutorials use those. As a professional developer, I do not do that because I don't want to add a bunch of things that I do not need. I only add exactly what I need. And that is the attitude I want you to adopt. So please avoid generators unless you create those generators yourself and you know what they're generating out. So what I'm going to do here is make my way over to my routes.rb, which is under my config, and we have no routes defined. And so we can define a default route, which we'll use root. I'm going to call this pages home. This is a convention I like to do. I always like to have a pages controller for generic stuff. And we'll go under app controllers. And again, I'm not using generators. I'm doing everything by hand here. And I'm going to right click here, make a new file. I'm going to call it pages controller.rb. And now that we have our controller, I'm going to write class pages controller, and I'm going to extend it from application controller. And in here, we might want to have a home page here. So I'm just going to say home. And we could set an environment variable or an instance variable locally for fun. So we'll just have a message here. We'll say hello world. And then we're also going to have to create ourselves a view. I personally like using Haml, but today I'm going to keep it simple and just stick with what's pre-installed into Rails. And we're going to create ourselves a new folder here called pages. And we're going to make a new file here called home.html.erb. Erb is the default templating language. So I'm going to say, I'm going to put h2 here. And in order to execute Ruby in here, we have to use this here. The equals signifies that it's going to be printed out to the screen. If you don't put that there, nothing will print out. Sometimes you don't want to print things out. I'm going to write in message here. All right, and so that should print us our message, and the route should default to that page. So I don't have to restart my app, or I shouldn't have to. Well, I guess we'll find out. I'm gonna hit a refresh here. And I have a little error. It has to do with turbo links. And honestly, I don't even want to use turbo links today. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Rails gives you a lot of stuff by default. I probably wouldn't even use this either. I don't need any of these things. Just disable turbo links in JBuilder. Stop your app. Do a bundle install. And that should suppress those errors. I'm going to restart my application. I'm bind it on port 00. We'll hit a restart there. And it's still complaining because that link is, I'm not using turbo links, it's disabled, but I guess I have to remove it from my layout. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I want the style sheets in JavaScript. I'm just going to remove the endpoint here. Okay, I don't want either of these. And by the way, JavaScript goes here. All right, I don't know why they put it, whoops. I don't know why they put it up there, but it's supposed to be the last tag in your body text. That is what you're supposed to do. So we'll just stop that, restart that there. We'll go back here, give this a nice refresh. And we have a bit of an error. It's because I left that comma there. I can see my error already. I'm just so used to catching my errors. And I'm just going to stop, restart. Probably didn't have to restart there, but I did anyway. And we'll hit refresh, and it's still complaining about this error. We don't want pack tag. I don't know what that is. I'm going to do link tag. That's what it used to be called. This is Rails 6. I'm not familiar with all the defaults in the new Rails 6. Maybe just JavaScript tag. So these are one of those things that you only do once in a while when you start up a new Rails app. But luckily, I've been doing this for 15 years. I can remember stuff. And so there we go. So now we have Hello World here, which is really nice. And so we have a default page. But what we need to do is set up an API endpoint, because that is the whole purpose of today. So in order to do that, it's going to be pretty darn easy. I want you to make your way back over to routes. And what we're going to do is make a new namespace. So I'm going to just type in namespace here. I'm going to call it API. And what I'm going to do here is I just want to define a new API endpoint. So for now, I'm just going to make a new one, and I'm just going to call it get. So that's going to use a get request. I'm just going to make it test. And I'm just going to pass this to pages test. All right. And so I'm just going to stop my application here because I just want to show you that if you type in rake routes, and also you can type in Rails routes. I'm just really old school. It used to be called rake, and now they switched it to Rails. But here you can see all the routes that are generated. And these are the routes that will be available to you. So if you ever get a 404 or it's saying something's not defined, you just run this and you just see if your routes are there. And so here you can see that my API has been defined, and then my get route is going to my page's home. I'm going to go back and start up my application back on port 80, or sorry, 000. Or bind it on 000. I'm not starting on port 80. And so what we'll need to do is we need to actually create this this controller and action. This is the controller, that is the action, right? So we'll go up here. And so since it's scoped to API, I'm going to need a folder called API. And it's pretty common practice that anytime you make a new namespace, you should create a base controller so that you can extend everything from there. So I'm going to make a new file here. I'm going to call it base controller.rb. And this is going to be called class API : Notice I'm putting this. This is a way of namespacing in Ruby. I have to do that because we have it in this folder here. I'm going to call this base controller. I'm going to extend that from application controller. And the advantage of here is that everything will extend from this this base. And so if I want to override everything the APIs, like put permissions or stuff there, that's where I'm going to put it. I'm now going to create my new pages controller here. Okay, and we're going to do class API pages controller this is going to be API base controller, and I'm going to just make a new action here because that's the one we defined earlier. Actually, I think it was called test, not home. Right? If we go back to our routes, we defined it as test, pages test, and so I'm going to call it test. And so generally, like if you don't specify a render, there's a render action that says what should I render or redirect to. You have to have one or the other at the end of an action. By default, it's always going to render in the views. So if it's pages here, it's going to go views, and then under the pages and then home, right? For, I'm in the wrong one here, like here. So pages controller, so look for pages and look for home. But you can override it. You could render whatever you want. For API, we don't want to make this directory structure. We want to return JSON. So I'm going to write render here, and I'm just going to write JSON, and then I can return whatever I want. So I can say success equals true. And this is a hash. This will automatically get converted to JSON. So in Rails or Ruby, you'd have to write to JSON, and you'd have to require the JSON gem. But that automatically happens when you use that, all right? And I could even specify the status. I could say 200. By default, it's going to be 200. But if I had an error, I could say 422, which is when something doesn't work properly. If it's access denied, I can put 403. Well, we're going to omit that. So now we have that endpoint. I'm just going to go ahead here. I shouldn't have to restart anything. Sometimes when you change routes, you might have to restart, or maybe not. I can't remember. I'm just going to hit a refresh here. I'm going to just type in API test. And there is no template because it's trying to serve text or HTML, right? And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for JSON here. I'm just going to double check that there. So, I mean, that should be fine. I mean, I don't want to render HTML anyway. But what I'm going to do over here is I'm just going to make a new folder here to work. I'm going to call it collection. And I'm going to call this collection my app. And we're in Postman now, by the way. And we'll go ahead here and expand this. And I want to make a new request. And I'm just going to call this API test. And I'm going to choose my collection here. And now that we're here, what I'm going to do is put in that request there. So this is going to be here. So I'm going to just grab that up there. Okay. And it's a GET request. I believe that's what we want it for. So we go routes, see how it says GET. And we're going to go back here. Pardon me. And so we'll go ahead and hit send. And so this should return back some data. Now, whatever happens, we can actually go here and see what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and just look at my logs, because our logs are always trailing, right? And here it says API pages controller test is missing a request for text and HTML. It really, really, really wants to render that HTML. And I don't know why it's doing that, because it's not, oh, you know what? I didn't define it in there. So that's the problem. Well, where did I put it then? Oh, that's fine. Okay, maybe, oh, it's in the base controller, sorry. So that's our problem here. So if we just copy this out and paste that in there, and I'll just save that. So that probably will now give us our JSON, which is what we want, right? If we go back here and I hit send, I have success true. So there we go. So that is the workflow for setting that up. The next thing is now we actually want to return data from the database. So let's go ahead and create ourselves some new tables. So Postgres has a database structure like tables, and those things are going to be defined in your schema.rb. That's going to say what it is that the schema should be. And that should be set in our DB directory here. And we don't have one yet because we haven't created anything yet. So what we'll do is we'll create a new migration. That should be called Rails generate. That's just short for, you could type generate, but I'm going to just put G for generate. And we're going to type migration. I'm going to just say set up tables. I always do this when it's the first time when I want to set up a bunch of tables. And so it's created us a migration file here. And here we can define the tables we want. And this is like a DSL for Rails, or just create migration files. You'd have to look it up. But I can just create a few things. So I'm just trying to think of like a common use case. So maybe we have like projects, okay? And I'll just put a T there. And we're going to need, maybe we're going to need tasks. Okay, and maybe we're going to need users here. And maybe we need an association between, because we're just trying to think of like what the associations are. So I can just do T timestamps. And by the way, I'm just coming up with this on the fly. I do this all day long. So for me, it is super easy. We're going to have to put a string called name, and we'll have a string called name here. And maybe we'll have a Boolean here that says completed, and we'll just say default to false. This is going to belong to a user. You can use references like this, and that would reference to that table. References aren't preferable when you're scaling your Postgres database out, so it's better not to have those foreign keys bound. So I always just do integer user ID, which is what it would do underneath. This probably belongs to a project, so we'll do that. We'll go here. We'll just name our user. We'll just say name, string name here, and maybe we'll put a counter cache on this for fun. So we'll just say tasks count. We'll have that an integer. You'll notice I always like to type in the name first by accident. We're just going to default that to 0. And up here, maybe we'll do that as well. We'll say tasks count, because a user could have some and then a task can have some, right? And this timestamps will create a created at and updated at timestamp. You always want to do that for your tables in Rails. There's no reason not to. It's always just good down the road when you have to look when things have been created or not created. So we have some very basic table structure set up here. And now what we can do is run that migration. So it's going to run rake db migrate. Again, you could run Rails db migrate. It's just I'm old school, and I just remember that all Rails does is remap to that. So. And there it's created those tables. You'll notice now we have a schema. This kind of defines all the stuff that we have in our table. So let's say tomorrow we had to start from scratch. If we did rake db schema load, it would load all the stuff in for us, or we could do migrate, and hopefully the migration would work. And so if I just want to take a look at this table, I'm just going to go to Postgres here and take a look at it, just make sure that it's working. And I'm going to do, I think, L for list the tables. And so we have Postgres or my app there, so I can probably connect to it by going my app dev, or maybe it's connect. Yeah, so yeah, C for connect, so connected to it, and I can say select all from tables, or maybe it's L for, or maybe DL, or L there, or DU. I don't know. I remember. You know what? It's just I've been using Table Plus for so long. I'm starting to forget my commands here. Maybe if I just do -H. I just want to list all the tables out. I thought it was L. 1 second. List all tables, Postgres. Even I have to Google sometimes. It is DT. Okay, of course. -D, /DT. So there's our tables. And so we don't have anything in those tables. If I did select all from tasks, I could see if there's anything there. All right. And now I just want to show you a Table Plus, which makes things a lot easier. But if you never had Table Plus, you can always do that. So over here, I have my Table Plus. I'm right now connected to the table, but I'm just going to go ahead and close this out and reopen Table Plus. So you'd have to go ahead and add a connection. I already have a connection here. If I go to Edit, I have my defaults in here. So port 5432 is the default for Postgres. We can put the database in here. If you don't specify anything, it will actually allow you to see all databases that are in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click it. And then I think I have to hit, it says Control K to connect to a database. So I'm going to do that. And here I can see I have a few other tables. And there's my app. I'm going to open it up. And now I can see my structure here. When you're using the free version of Postgres, you can only have 2 tables open. Or actually, it's letting me have multiples. I'm not sure as to why today. Maybe I have the paid one on here. Okay, but if you're using Table Plus, generally they're restricted to 2 tabs, and then they'll error out there. But you can see I don't really have anything in here. I can look at the structure here of the table, and then I can insert data. And I can insert rows right here like this. But what I'm going to do is not do it through here. I'm going to do it through Rails. It's generally better to do it that way through Rails if you can. And so we have these 3 tables, but we're going to need some models on these tables. So each model maps to an actual table, and that's generally you'll have a per model per table. So I'm going to go ahead here and call it project.rb. And by the way, this is all convention. You got to follow it this way. You can't call it projects. You got to call it project singular. I mean, notice our controls are always pluralized, like pages. Like if you had users, but it wouldn't be user. So we'll go ahead here and then create a task.rb. And in here, we'll just do a class task application record. Used to be active record. Now they changed it to application record. As you can see, I have a very good memory for this stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and just set that up for each of these here. Oops. Okay, I'll just type it by hand. And we'll go back and look at our schema because I did set up like task controllers, and I want those for counter caches because those are always nice to have. So I'm just going to say has many tasks, has many I think it's just tasks actually. So that's that. We'll go to tasks. So a task can belong to a user, it can belong to a project, and it has counter cache. Counter cache is this feature where if you set it, it will, every time an element is added, it will count it up for you. So we'll know the count on those things there, counter cache. As you can see, I don't have any plugins to help me out. I got to just make sure I don't make any spelling mistakes here. And then we have the user. So we'll just say has many tasks. Maybe we'll put some validation on here. Not a big deal for this demo here, but it's just good practice so that you learn the basics. So we'll go over here. And so on our schema, we have a name. So we want to make sure that there's always a name. So validates name. We'll say presence true. That's the most basic thing you can set on these. And we have names on all these things. So I'm just going to go ahead there. And we'll go ahead and copy that. And we'll go here and paste it. And we'll paste it on this one as well. Okay, and so sometimes we want to create records via Postgres here, like directly in here. But most of the times, if we want to make records, we can make a migration file, or we can open up the Rails console. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to open up the Rails console here. So I'm going to go our Rails C or Rails console. The C is just for console. And so now what I can do is I can interact with these objects and start creating some stuff. So I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to say project, whoops, type in code, don't want to do that. I'm going to do down here and say project create. I'm going to call it name. And we're going to call it my app. Okay, and so that you can see here, it returned an active record object. You can see that the ID is set. That means it's been created. If I bring back up Postgres here and we click into here, I just want to undo that action there. I didn't actually want to do that. Maybe we can do Control X or undo. I'm not sure how to undo here. Maybe I just close that out. Okay, I don't know. This record really doesn't want to go away. Well, if I just hit refresh, it's a bit easier on a Mac. There's like a drop down for this. Discard all changes. There we go. So here you can see the record exists. It's set to 0. All right. And what we'll do is we'll just create a few extra records here. So we want to create a user. So I'm going to say user.create. I'm going to set the name. Notice I can put parentheses or no parentheses. It just depends on what you want to do. I'm going to say Andrew Brown here. We'll go ahead. Again, returns a record. I know it worked because it has the ID here. We'll go back to Postgres here, or Table Plus. And if we just give it a refresh, you can see my record is there. And we still have 0, 0. I'm going to go ahead and now create some tasks. It's going to say task.create. We need to provide a name, so we'll just say, whoops, that was a problem. I just did Control C to back out of that. So notice that I have this icon. It means that it's still trying to execute. I'm just going to hit colon here to stop it. Sometimes that happens. I'm going to go ahead and try this again. So we'll say task.create. I want a name. So we'll call this setup Rails skeleton app. And what we'll do is we will set a user. So we'll say user ID 1, or what we can do is say user, and we can say user.find by name. I think we said Andrew Brown. We can do a little bit different here. We can say like project ID. It's just different ways of doing it. I'm going to look at what the project ID is here. It's 1. Okay, just showing you there's a few different options. And what we'll do is hit enter. Undefined belong to, that's a spelling mistake. It's supposed to be belongs to. If that happens, we probably press reload here and that'll reload the console. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to exit, and when you exit, you have to type in exit, okay? But I'm just gonna see if that fixes the problem. There we go, so it created the record. I'm gonna do refresh here. Notice that it's 1 on users. Notice that it's 1 on project, and under tasks, I have it here. We'll just create a few more records here. So we'll just say create, set up Rails skeleton app, create default default route. That's our like root route. We could say create an API endpoint. Raw SQL query. Okay, great. And so now I'm going to go back here, give it a refresh. Here I have some, which is really, really nice. And so now what we want to do is actually query that data. I'm going to just exit out of the console. Well, we don't necessarily have to do that because, well, yeah, we'll just exit out of it. That's fine. And what I'm going to do is go back and start up my Rails app. Again, I have to start mine on bind 0000. You do not have to do that necessarily, but it's going to depend on you. So what I want to do is make my way back to Pages Controller. And here you can see that I have my success true, but I actually want to return some of this data. And so what I want to do here is just figure out the simplest way to do that. And one of the ways of doing that is using Arial. So Arial is this is this query language that is built into Rails. I generally don't use it that much anymore. I always write raw queries when I can, but you need to know it to some degree. We actually used it earlier when we were specifying how to find a record when we did user.find. That is Arial. But what I'm going to do here is just try to write some. So we're going to say, I want all tasks. So we'll just say, and actually, you know what? Now that we have this test, let's go ahead and set something up proper. So what I'm going to do is make a new API endpoint here. I'm going to call it new. I'm going to call it new file. We're going to call it tasks controller. Okay, and I'm just going to create this one here. So this is going to be class API, tasks controller, application. Oh, this is API. So we're going to do API base controller. And we'll do an index here. Okay, I'm just going to do true for a second here, and then I'm going to go back. I'm just going to close a few of my tabs. We just have a few too many tabs here, and I want to make my way over to my routes file here. So just keep on closing, just too many things going on. And there's my routes. And so we want to define a new one here. I'm going to call resources tasks. Okay, what this does is it's a more convenient way of creating a bunch of routes. This is going to create us a get here, which is known for index. Okay, then it's going to create us a post. For our create action, so that would be like our create. So whatever our table is, if it's like our controllers to be this, tasks create. It will create a put, so it will be the ID, and that is for an update. It will create an edit or a new page, so that'll be a get, and that would be new. I'm just writing this out to show you what it creates. It would make a get for edit. So that'd be on that. Seems like a lot, but you know, you get used to it and you remember it. And then we have a delete action, which is going to be on the ID here, and that's going to go to tasks destroy. I just want to show you that it generates those links out. So remember our trusty rake routes or Rails routes, whatever you want to type. If we scroll up here, we should be able to see those routes now. So you can see it made it. It says API tasks. And so there they all are. The reason I didn't type it in there is because it just scopes it, but you can see that's what it does. There's also a patch. I've never used patch. I never do. But anyway, the point is that we only need it for the index. So I'm going to go here and say only the index. So I can do it like this. But I prefer to do it like this. It's just another way of doing it. That way I don't have to like put a lot of strings and squares. And so that's actually, I'll just keep it simple for you. We don't need to make it complicated. And so that should just generate out that. So if I rerun rake routes, we should now only see that single one there. So see, there's only the one. All those other ones have vanished. Okay. And that's better because you don't want to have all these routes because if you have some default code there, maybe you're exposing things you shouldn't be exposing. So what I'm going to do is now that we have that, I just want to test out that API endpoint. I think it should work already. So I'm going to go ahead here and add a new request. Actually, I'm going to make a new folder. I like to keep things organized in here. So I can just call this tasks. And then in there, this could just be loose up there. I can make a new folder for pages as well. Okay. I'm going to just drag that under there. And for tasks here, I'm going to add a new request. We're going to call this, it's going to be API tasks. So it's supposed to return all the tasks, right? And I'm just going to drag that into that folder there. And then we'll just go ahead and make this a little bit easier on us. And I'm going to just paste that up in here, and we'll just change that to tasks. And so I'm just going to save that and save that. Those little dots mean that it hasn't been saved. I'm going to hit send, and I should get back some JSON. We had an error here. We might not be running our application right now. So just scroll on down. We aren't. That is the problem. Whoops. And I will go back here. And I will just test that this is working. Here we get true, so there we go. So now let's use some Arial to return some queries. And once we do that, then we'll write some raw queries, okay? So the first thing I want to do is go back to my tasks controller. So I'm going to scroll all the way up here, go to tasks, and we just want to return some records here. So we'll just say tasks or task.all, all right? I'm just going to assign that to a collection here. We don't need an instance variable because we're not going to render it in a view, but I'm just going to say collection here. And the thing is, whatever you pass to JSON, it will automatically do this. It'll do to JSON. Okay, so I don't have to put that on there, or at least I don't think I have to. And we probably should order it. If you don't order it, then sometimes the order just ends up random. So I'm just going to say ID, ID ascending. Okay. And you're wondering where this ID comes from. It's here. We didn't specify in our schema, but every table has an ID, whether you ask for one or not. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just restart my server there. I didn't mean to stop it there, and I'm just going to go back to here. I'm going to hit send, and I'm going to see what I get. And so here you can see I'm getting records back. What it's doing is it's returning everything. It's returning every single column in our table there. So if we go to task, you can see that's all that stuff, and it's all in an array as JSON objects, and then we could work with that data. The thing is that you don't want to return everything. You only want to return what you need, because then you could be exposing sensitive information in Postgres. I'm going to write a Postgres query here. I'm just going to write that. If I just wanted very particular data, select from tasks, order by tasks ID. Again, if you're running into errors, you might just have to close these off. I have the paid version, so I'm not going to have that problem. And I'm just going to say tasks all right? And if I run that command, whoops, it's auto-completing. It's kind of frustrating. This is what it's doing. So it's returning all that information. And I just want to show you down below, see where it says select tasks from all, order by ID. So that's what it is. It just translated into this, but I could also write it into here, all right? But what we want to do is we just want to select some stuff, right? So maybe we only want to select the name, okay? And let's just say that's all we wanted. There's no sensitive data in this, so it's not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and hit run here. That's all I get now. And so if we wanted to do the same thing here, we'd write select. And we could say name here. That's a Ruby symbol, just so you know. And then if I go back here, whoops, if I go back to this and hit run, send, you'll notice it's only sending the name. It always wants the ID, even though we're not doing it there. So we'd have to actually put an ID. Okay. And we'll just hit send there. Okay, so that's how we can narrow that stuff down. And then what we can do is if we want additional tables, we could join them into there. So that's using join. So if we did that over here, let's say we want to show all the tasks, like we want to show the associating projects, we can use a left join here. So we'll say left join projects on projects.id, where tasks.project.id is that. And then now what I can do is go up here, put a comma, and say projects.name as project. Okay, and if I run that, that autocomplete's very frustrating for me. Left join projects. Oh, I have a spelling mistake over here. So all that auto typing doesn't help me whatsoever. And so there you can say I have the name and the project, right? So because there's a bit more flexibility here, but let's say I want to do it over here, what I'm going to do, again, this is not a raw query. This is just using Arial. I don't want you really using this unless it's simple queries, but we're going to type in joins, and we're just going to say project. It's project. I always forget if it's join or joins or whatever, or includes. I always forget, but we'll find out through trial and error here. It's not a big deal. So we'll hit send. We have an error here. It says no implicit symbol to string. So maybe it's project. No. Okay, maybe it's joins. I'll just put projects here. Can't join task to association name projects. You mishap, you spell it. Maybe it's just project. Okay, and so here it does the inner joins. It's doing the inner. Inner means like if the value's not present, don't show it. You might want to do an inner or left. But that pretty much looks like what we want, except you notice that it's doing task ID and it's doing task name, but it's not selecting projects. So what I'm going to do here is I might be able to do it like this. I'm going to say another select on it, because this will by default select that. And we're just going to say projects name as project. Okay. And we'll hit send. Oh, I have a spelling mistake. It should be projects there. Send. And so you can see this query is very much like the query I'm doing, okay? So I don't like doing multiple selects like this. I would probably just do it in one, so I just take out this one here. Okay, and we could just say tasks ID, tasks.name. All right, and we can make this a little bit easier on ourselves. I think we can just do this here. All right, maybe we have to do it at the dot. I don't ever remember. Again, I avoid very complex Arial this way because I just find it cumbersome. Because a lot of people find it really hard to use Arial for complex things. And also, sometimes it doesn't do the most optimal query. So it's better to know what it is that you want to do. So I'm just going to make sure that this still works here. We're going to go back to Postman here. I'm going to hit send. Missing attribute project ID. It worked a second ago. Try this again. Let's go back to when it did work. Worked when it was this, right? Oh, it's still complaining. As project, inner join projects on ID, task project ID, missing attribute project ID. So it's saying that the project ID doesn't exist. Did I spell it wrong? I don't think so. If we go to our original query here in Postgres. No, it's there. So, I mean, this is the thing is like, I don't really care about showing you how to use Arial. I just want you to know that it exists and the pitfalls of it. And there's a lot of trial and error because you're working through an abstract layer. And so I just want to show you the way I would properly do it. So instead of doing this, what we're going to do is we're just going to write some raw SQL. And so since this is related to task, I'm going to create a new thing called task here. I'm going to just say index.json. Okay, notice that we don't have to define our task. It's just auto-loaded everywhere. So I'm going to go over here, and we need to make a new method here. It's going to be self.indexJSON. The reason we're using self is because we're defining it on the class instead of the instance. So if you said model.task.new, and then you did model index.json, in this case, you would use you define it as index.json, but when you're doing task.indexJSON here, you're at the class level, so that's where you're doing def self.indexJSON, okay? So what we'll do is we'll make our way back over to our task here. I'm going to say end, and we're not going to pass anything into it, and I want to execute some raw SQL. So I'm just going to go off screen here because I never can remember this always that easily here. And I'm just going to look for the code that I want to bring in because I want to do it execute or select array, I suppose. So just give me a moment here. It's taking me a little bit of time to find it. Shouldn't take too long. I'm just looking at what I'm looking for here is in monster queries because I have a library for this. I don't ever write this out by hand anymore, but I just want to show you the underlying stuff. And so I'm just looking here for the implementation on how I originally did it. Because usually you'd use like connection, like active record base connection select or something, or execute. So we have, I think it's just, because I have select object and select array in here. Oops. I'm not having any luck today. I checked query, right? Maybe it's under active record. Oh, here they are. Okay. And so I see execute. Select JSON. Oh, okay. So we need to use select value is what we're looking for today. Yeah, so that's what we want. We want to use select value or select values underneath. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use select value. This is a built-in function into Rails here. So if I just typed in Rails select value, just to show you where it's coming from. This is more like low-level stuff, but like these are the things that we can do. So here we can actually literally write SQL and get some data back. And that's what we're going to try to do here right now. So I'm just going to stop my server here, go to Rails console, and just let's give it a go here. So what we'll do is we'll just say task.select values, and then we'll just say select all from tasks. Task connection to establish a connection. Oh, I guess we have to do connection here. We don't have to do it on task. I'm just doing it here. I could just do it on active record because that's actually what it's using underneath. Okay. And it ran into an error, so I'm just gonna go up here. Maybe I'll just specify the value I want. I just want ID. I don't need a semicolon on the end of this. Maybe we'll just do it on the task instead. I don't know if that's giving it a problem. There we go. Yeah, I used to be able to do active records, just giving us some trouble. Again, this is Rails 6. I'm used to Rails 5. So there it's selecting those values. There's also select value, which is a little bit different. I think it just selects a single thing there, but we'll work our way through it. So what we'll do is we'll write the query that we want first. And remember that we want our data returned as an array of JSON objects here. So if I go back to our task here, it was rendering before. If I hit send, it should work. What we'll do is we'll just go back to have like an example of what we're looking at. So go back here and just for the moment, we'll comment that out. I'll just say task all, right? Shouldn't have a problem with that. Oh, it's because I'm not running the app right now. So I'm just going to do an exit here. And what we'll do is we'll hit send. And so you can see we want it as an array and then an array of JSON objects. And so Postgres, when it returns objects, it's not necessarily like that. It's wrapped in Ruby objects, and we could cast them to JSON objects. But the thing is that with Postgres, you can actually return JSON directly without having to do this like translation between a Ruby object to a JSON string. And so that's what we're going to do. So in order to do that, we're going to go over to back to Postgres, and there's some functions that Postgres has that can allow us to do that. And so I'm just going to copy the code over here. Okay. And so what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to return an array of objects. So there's a few things going on here. We have row to JSON, array ag, and array to JSON again. And if you want to look these up, you can. You just go row to JSON, Postgres. Okay, these are JSON functions here. And so here it says, return the rows as a JSON object. Line feeds will be added to level 1, etc. Returns the array as a JSON array. So you can read all about those things, even coalesce. If we go back to our code here like this, this just says like if this returns null, then just return an empty array. Makes it easier for debugging. But the idea is take the row, turn it into JSON, aggregate the array into a Postgres array, and then turn that Postgres array into a JSON array. That's what it's doing. And again, I don't ever type these out. I use my library for this, but like this is as complex as it is. You can just copy and paste this in every time. And so I'm just gonna take my query here, cut it, and paste it. And we'll go ahead and run that. And so now it's returning it as, it says coalesce, which is not the nicest name. I don't care about renaming that. It's not a big deal. We could say like as query, but we're not going to see that anywhere, so it doesn't matter. But here you can see it's returning an array of objects, and it's going to return that JSON string. And so what we can do is just copy this query here. We're going to go over here, and we're just going to go and bring this back here. And I'm going to go over to my task, and I'm just going to want to paste that in there. And we need to make this a string, so I'm going to type in here. What I'm looking for is a here doc. A here doc is a way of doing multi-lines in any language. So the syntax in Ruby is like this. It's like a very old style syntax. So I'm just going to copy it like this. I didn't make any huge mistake. I don't know what that website's talking about. And so we're going to go here. I'm going to just type in SQL, and I'm going to copy this in like this. Maybe indent this, make this a little bit cleaner. Okay, and so now I have this query, and I can pass this query along like this. Okay, and then this should return JSON. And I can just put a binding pry in here. Actually, we'll put bybug in here. I don't think we have binding pry installed, but bybug is definitely installed. I like binding pry, but we're not going to go ahead and install that right now. And so what I want to do is I just want to test what comes out of here. So I just want to see if the results come back. So I'm going to stop this, go to Rails C, and we can just run this. We'll just say task.indexJSON. And we see we have on line 19, so it says task connection establish, failed to establish connection. I think it's because we have to do connection. Okay, notice I don't have to type in task. Self refers to the task itself. I'm going to go ahead and run this here. Oops, hidden up too much. Task index JSON. And so you can see what it did is it ran the query, and it actually ran it. You can tell that it went against the database here. It says 1.4 milliseconds is how fast it was. And we'll just see what JSON was returned. So I'll write JSON here, and it's a JSON string, right? So if we want to do this in Ruby, we'd actually have to cast it because it's a string. So we'd have to say JSON, we'd have to use JSON.parse JSON. And what it will do is it'll assign it to a hash. So now I can reference it as a hash here, like a Ruby hash. Oh yeah, it's an array. So I could say like first and then say hash. But we don't want to do that because if it's already a string, that's all we have to do. We have to pass it along. And so that is the most optimal. We don't want to have it to turn it into a hash and then turn it back. That's just very inefficient. So we'll just exit out of that now. And bybug is really useful. I mean, I use binding pry, which is more colors and more features, but so we have that JSON, and that's what we want to return. So, I mean, we want to do return JSON. Ruby by default returns whatever is the last thing, so we don't have to write that. I don't have to assign it to a variable. And so that's going to just pass that along, and that should just work. So we'll go ahead here, and I'm going to hit send. I probably have to run my app, right? Oh, you know what? I didn't bind it. And there's our data, and that's exactly what we want. So this is the most optimal way, the absolute most optimal way to send data along. Obviously, there's more to it, like how would you embed variables and things like that. But that's for another time. This is the most basic thing that I want you to know. A lot of this is abstracted away. So I have my own gem you saw there a moment ago. For fun, let's actually try to go install and see if that it makes our lives a bit easier here. I don't know if it's going to work. I've never installed it into a Rails 6 app. It does work on a Rails 6 application. I just have never done that before. So let's go ahead and give it a go for fun. So I'm just going to, it's not part of the Ruby, it's not on Ruby gem, so we'll have to manually install it here. But let's just see if it makes our queries a little bit easier. Okay. And we're just going to say monster queries. I used to name all my gems monster because my company was called Monsterbox. I'll probably end up renaming this gem at some point. I'm just going to do a bundle install. If this fails, it's fine. We'll just quit after this, but I just want to see if this works. We have to specify GitHub. Path is when you want to specify it for local development. If we specify GitHub, we don't have to give it the full URL. We just have to do this here. That's a lot easier. We'll do a bundle install. And now it'll fetch it from GitHub. It'll install it. For my library to work, you need to have a queries. It's installing Ruby Racer. This is what I was talking about if you need Node.js. This could throw an error if we don't have Node.js installed. I think I have it installed on my machine. If this doesn't work for you, don't stress out about it. But I'm going to go ahead here and make a new table here or folder here called queries. And what we'll do is we'll make a new folder here called tasks. And then we'll make a new file here, and we'll call it index.sql. And I'm going to go back to my task here. If I can go find it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this out and place it in here. And this makes it a lot easier because then you don't have to worry about all that abstraction there. And then I just have to do select array. That's the built-in function that we were looking at earlier. That's all that this is all doing. It's just automatically inserting the stuff into here. And I can even show you if you like. If we go to the lib here, monster queries, active record, I think here, and see select array, it's just wrapping it in there for you and calling select value. So that's really nice. And then the other thing it does is it allows you to have this mapping to that query folder. But anyway, we'll just take that out there. And instead of writing this big ugly query, we can just do queue.tasks.index. And if we wanted to pass in variables like this, we could pass in variables and then call them using handlebars, but we're not doing that today. I'm going to call SQL. And so that's a lot cleaner, I think. Again, I don't know if this is going to work. We'll find out here in 2 seconds. We'll hit send. Oops, you know what? Can never seem to remember that. We'll just start it on port or binding 000, hit send. And we got an error. Query doesn't exist for task index. It probably is where the table is. Is that a folder? It doesn't look like it's in the right place. Let's see if I can drag that. Yes, move. Okay, because if it says it doesn't exist, it's just not finding it. I'll try that again. I don't know if we had to restart there, but it found it. So this little DSL I wrote helps you quickly find that, and then it's running the index JSON. So you can see that's there is that code there. And you can see it's returning. So that is the most basic API endpoint, definitely an essential skill, absolutely something that I would look for if hiring somebody, if they can do all that stuff, because it's very routine programming. And this is what I'm doing like all day, just creating queries. So there you go.